While Matt Gaetz has withdrawn his basically him becoming the Attorney General for Trump, we still have a nomination of RFK Jr. For the Secretary of Health and Human Services. We've talked about the specific nomination, I think, just when it happened about a week ago or so. But in there we more focus on the sort of the political aspects and sort of the ideology of RFK Jr. But something that I wanted to talk about, but I didn't have as much knowledge about, is his specific claims about how he thinks about, for example, vaccines. So we are back here again. I was wondering when we should do this episode, but now that people are starting to drop off from the nomination, I wanted to do. I'm still hoping his nomination will get dropped, but I wanted to do a show before his nomination hopefully gets dropped. So joining me, welcome to the Daily Objective. Joining me today is Megan Ribbons. Earlier, I had her in the notes as the scientist, which I think is how RFK Jr. sort of views science almost. But she has a PhD in molecular biology. Megan, welcome to the show. Just quickly, what was your reaction when he got the nomination?
Um, well, let me preface by saying that I do not speak for my employer. Um, I don't think the word I used is transmissible. Let me just say that not only do I work in the biotech industry, I help develop gene therapies, um, but I'm also considering starting a biotech business of my own. And I'm concerned about getting funding. I think it's going to be hard to turn a profit and keep the doors open for the existing companies and for potential startup companies if RFK Jr.'s nomination gets through. Now, I am not an investing expert, and this part of the industry is very new to me, so don't take that as gospel, but I'm concerned.
Yeah, I mean, he's already made some concerning statements about, I mean, the FDA, while I believe he doesn't directly appoint, I think, not sure what the name is, the director of the ADF, but it will be under his supervision. And, while I don't, again, we don't want to catastrophize, but if we have like 4 years of pretty much nothing going through FDA or some, I think, scenario like that, it's going to be very concerning. But we've already talked about the sort of political aspects on the other show. So there are some claims he made. We've talked about Megan, what should be the most interesting to talk about. And I think his stance on vaccines is, I think, the most, really the most concerning and also the most revealing. So he had an interview on Lex Friedman where they talked about, is he anti-vax, is he not anti-vax, and also about some specifics. And so let's watch a little bit of it, and then I'll go to you, Megan.
You've talked about that the media slanders you by calling you an anti-vaxxer. And you've said that you're not anti-vaccine, you're pro-safe vaccine. Difficult question. Can you name any vaccines that you think are good?
I think some of the live virus vaccines are probably averting more problems than they're causing. There's no vaccine that is, safe and effective.
So I think here is a good stop. He's not anti-vaccine, but he just doesn't think there is a vaccine that's safe and effective. Megan, what's your reaction to that?
Well, let me start by motivating the audience. Imagine someone said to you, there are too many injuries caused by car accidents. We need to go back to horse-drawn carriages. How would that impact your life? And that may sound hyperbolic, but to be honest, I think it's a pretty apt analogy. And indeed, horse-drawn carriages are less safe. A famous example is when one killed Pierre Curie, the famous husband of the husband and wife team that won 2 Nobel Prizes, one in physics and one in chemistry. So let me back that up a little bit. The first kind of well-known, there have been documented cases of attempting to sort of vaccinate without really knowing what it was, smallpox, for a long time throughout history. The first well-documented is Jenner. And what that so the idea was that, this is gross. You'd take a little bit of pus from someone who had smallpox and they had tons of pustules on their body, and use a needle that you put put in the pus, and then you poke people with it. Now, I'm sorry for grossing out the audience, but what that meant was that your risk of death due to smallpox went from, I think, don't quote me, about a 40% chance of mortality to about 2%. Now, again, that's not something everyone should have done, right? There are lots of extenuating circumstances for each individual when they were faced with that choice. But for a lot of people, that choice made sense. We've come a long way since then. So, for example, I just learned recently that George Washington would inoculate all his troops against, I think it was smallpox, to protect them. And like I said, we've come a long way since then. And I would love to just spend a couple of hours talking about, the history of vaccines and kind of each technological advance that they've made, because it's like going from a landline to a flip phone to a smartphone. It's really exciting and really brilliant how this is all. And I can't take any credit for it. I just think I'm just sitting on the sidelines enjoying it. But what RFK just said there, that there's no safe and effective vaccines, is the opposite of true.
Yeah, it sort of reminds me of, and I think that's why this is the most concerning. It's almost like an epistemological issue, that viewing the idea of viewing safe and effective vaccine, viewing it as as like almost like a cure. Basically, you take this one thing, nothing wrong with happen to you, and it will suddenly like cure you of everything, instead of, as you said, like putting into context, like yeah, we you cannot look at things as like this, like, I don't want to say absolutes, because you should look at things as absolutes, but as completely out of context. As you don't look. It sort of reminds me when completely different topic, but when Alex Epstein talks about fossil fuels, and that, when you look at or when you look at sort of like the climate related, or sort of, you only look at the bad stuff. You only look at there is an increase in temperature. There was the hurricanes are bigger, instead of putting in the full context. Hey, people are actually safer because of the energy. And I want to translate it to vaccines, because it seems very similar. Like, yeah, I mean, if you just take the most recent COVID vaccine, yeah, many people suffered from some side effects. Many people, unfortunately, but what were the numbers in total? Billions of people got vaccinated against it. Maybe you can talk a little bit about that
Yeah.
specifically.
So it's funny and what you just said really, really reinforces what I was saying about the car versus horse-drawn carriage analogy. Um, the cars, automobiles are a lot safer than horse-drawn carriages, but they're not infinitely safe. There's not no injuries and no deaths. There are a lot fewer per capita. Um, but it's unreasonable to expect that the next technological innovation means that there's no risk, that there's no side effects. It means that it's that there's probably less of one or both. So I think that's important to remember. I'm sorry, I totally blanked on what your question was. Oh, the
Uh,
COVID vaccines. Yes. So it's funny you mentioned that, because when the lockdown started, early 2020, that's when I started working on COVID diagnostics. So, I was kind of watching the illness and the symptom and mortality rate pretty closely because I was working with positive patient samples before there was a vaccine, and I was really nervous. Um, so when, as soon as the vaccines became available, I got vaccinated. And it was amazing to kind of watch the bifurcation between mortality rates among people who weren't vaccinated versus those who were. Um, and at the time, I remember it was a difference of, I think, don't quote me on these numbers, around at least 90%. Like your chances of getting seriously ill or dying because of COVID when you had the vaccines were at least an order of magnitude less. Now, again, that's, if you generally have a bad reaction when you get a flu shot and you don't really ever interact with people or cats or dogs, maybe the vaccine isn't right for you. Now, if you're a young man, maybe the Pfizer vaccine is not the right one. You know what I mean? And I can't tell you what's best for you, or any particular individual. You know you. I don't know you. So I can only tell you kind of things that might be helpful in making your decision. I'm not going to make them for anybody else. That being said, the COVID vaccines really were the smartphone as opposed to the flip phones we've been working with before. And that was really wonderful to see them do their job so well.
Yeah, so we'll go to the video because he goes on to talk about the polio vaccines, which you said you have a lot to say. So I definitely want to go to that. But first, let me thank our super chatters. So we have a super chat from Jonathan. Thank you so much. We have a super chat from Bonnie. Thank you so much. Another super chat from Jonathan. Thank you so much. A super chat from Robert. Thank you so much. He says, Dr. Megan brings the full context to the subject. That's why we have her on. And we also have a super chat from Alex. Thank you so much. She says, Lex truly encapsulates the banality of the just asking questions crowd. He's the Oprah of podcasts. You get an interview, you get an interview, you get an interview. He democratizes idiocity. I don't know how to pronounce it. I don't want to talk too much about Lex Friedman, but I generally sort of agree. I think these podcasts are good in a sense, sort of like also like Piers Morgan podcasts are good, and so we can actually hear from these people. But I do agree that a lot of times, they offer platform to someone. They don't offer any pushback, as I say, when it comes to Lex, and this sort of just gets out there, and then we have to go on a show to debunk it. Well, at least it provides content for us. Megan, do you want to go to the polio part?
Yes, please.
Those are big words. What about the polio?
Words.
Can we talk about the?
Well, here's the problem.
Yes.
Here's the problem. The polio vaccine contained a virus called simian virus 40, SV40. It's one of the most carcinogenic materials that is known to man. In fact, it's used now by scientists around the world to induce tumors in rats and guinea pigs in labs. But it was in that vaccine. 98 million people who got that vaccine in my generation got it. And now you've had this explosion of soft tissue cancers in our generation that kill many, 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 many more people than polio ever did. So if you say to me,
So what's your answer to that?
It's hard to pack that much wrong into a couple of sentences the way he did. So I know SV40. I actually use one of its genetic elements pretty routinely. That's not going to cause anybody cancer. You could eat this particular element that I work with, and it wouldn't taste good, but it wouldn't do anything else to you. So the first thing he said was that SV40 was used in the polio vaccine. SV40 is not the same species as polio. It is a I forget how to say it. I have it written down here. Sorry. I always love looking things up and it drives everyone else. Polioma virus, that's not the same as a polio virus. In fact, they're not the same genus. So they're not like cousin species. They're not the same family, which means they're not as related as us and chimpanzees. They're not the same order. They're about as related. The polyomavirus and the poliovirus are about as related as human beings are to yeast. So essentially what RFK Jr. is saying is that we're vaccinating against polio using Dutch elm disease. If that were true, it would not be effective. But it's not true, and it is effective. The other thing he mentioned was that because the polio vaccine was SV40, which it isn't, and his generation got vaccinated for polio, they're now getting cancer. That's reversing cause and effect, right? The number one predictor of cancer is age. The longer you live, the more likely you are to get cancer. So if you die of polio as a child, chances are you're not going to have time to develop cancer. Childhood cancers are very rare. If you die as a middle-aged person of heart disease, you're probably not going to get cancer, because even getting cancer in your 40s and 50s is relatively rare. You normally get it when you're 70 or 80. So the fact that, the polio vaccine helped a lot of his generation to survive long enough to get cancer does not mean that the polio vaccine caused cancer. It's a reverse of cause and effect. And again, this is kind of like him saying, there are too many deaths caused by cars or involved in car accidents, so we need to go back to something less safe. You know what I mean? Like, sorry, I know I keep hammering at this analogy, but I think it's apt. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I mean, it sort of reminds me of this of like a big misuse of because oftentimes people try to use statistics, they try to use graphs to basically try to put their point across. But something I learned when I was in college or in university is that actually understanding statistics, understanding graphs is like it's like a discipline. It's something you have to know, you have to like learn about. It sort of reminds me, I think, there is like I'm not sure if it's like an actual point someone tries to make or if it's like a joke, but that smoking prevents Alzheimer's, and the reason is because you are more likely to die before again you ever were to develop Alzheimer's. So it's when he talks about it really does remind me of this similar like trying to hide behind because they often do. Even RFK says, he just looks at the data, he just looks at information he has, but he is like misusing it completely, at least from what I'm seeing. What do you think?
Yeah, it really does strike me that he's not looking at the data to say, with the genuine curiosity of like, what health is not an accident, right? We don't remain healthy and then something bad happens to us. Health is a real pursuit that we are always trying to get better at. I mean, most people throughout human history lived in squalor and died really young and in really terrible ways. So it's it's a real achievement that human beings are now living on average well beyond 70. Um, and if he really cared about how that happens and how to extend lifespan and health span, how to have more sick kids enjoy a day of being a kid and being healthy. That's kind of my job. Um, he'd genuinely look and say, okay, what's worked? What hasn't? Where has health been advanced and where has it been reversed? And I don't think he's doing that. I don't think there's genuine curiosity there. And I don't think health is really his motivation.
An interesting question we had before we went live is I think Richard was wondering basically how do you default, or maybe default is not the right word, but how do you properly sort of trust experts or sort of have certain what's the right word I'm looking for? Basically using experts properly, not sort of taking it on the face value that automatically if someone has a degree and they say it, I mean, RFK probably has some degree, that it makes sense, but also, you probably don't have time to go look into mRNA vaccines. What do they mean? Which one can I take and all that?
Yeah, I really appreciate this question because I am no different in this respect, right? I work with viruses and I work with viruses of viruses. But I'm not an immunologist, right? What a live virus or an attenuated virus or a spike protein of a virus or the mRNA of a spike protein of a virus is going to do to a particular immune system, that's out of my wheelhouse. So I can tell you what those technologies do and how they were discovered and developed. But again, what one particular person's immune system is going to do is very individual. So in that respect, I think we're all in that same dilemma, right? How do you think critically about the information you're getting? So my first thing I would say to that is that I have a lot of empathy for anyone who's concerned about that dilemma. The second thing I would say is if ARCUK wants me on, we can talk about the fun stuff some more. I love talking shop. And the third thing I would say is be gentle with yourself and be very focused on the information you're getting. What's the agenda? What's the motivation? And, people are not always honest about what that is. But I would say even those people who might say something with which I agree might be saying it for dubious motivations. And that is perfectly okay to regard with suspicion. You know what I mean? You don't have to wander around thinking that everyone is lying to you. But it's okay to kind of put this in the maybe category, and just do the best you can.
Yeah, the especially when sort of during the pandemic, when COVID was raging, that you sort of had these like two sides, pretty much almost of the same coin, which I would almost say sort of like tribalistic thinking. That you had people on one side who wear masks in like public pools or I don't know, pools or whatever, just like sort completely taking it to the crazy level. And then you had sort of the other side, which was I don't trust anything. I don't trust what anyone says. But if someone says if I take ivermectin that will help me against COVID, I will trust that specific part, but nothing that sort of the mainstream tries to tell me. So I think it sort of, I guess, falls back to basically sort of what Ayn Rand says. Be independent in your thinking. Don't take again, I don't want to use extremes, but don't just take sort of like the opposite of what someone else is saying and automatically take that as the truth. As
Yeah.
Robin says in the chat, be active minded.
Yeah. I would amplify what you were saying. And I I was just as offended when someone says, I believe science, right? Science is not supposed to be treated as something to, put your faith in. It's not about thoughtless belief. It's about, you know, I have listened to people who have made arguments that I think make sense and agree with my previous knowledge. And I was just offended by people who say I believe science, as people who say I don't trust anything or scientists are evil. I don't know if I was wearing a mustache and an evil monocle that day, but I don't think I'm evil. So I really appreciate the kinds of conversations I have with people at ARCUK and my family too, right? They're not scientists. And they'll ask me about GMOs, and I'll say, here's the work I've done. Here's the work I've kind of followed. Here are the issues. Here are the results. Here are the open questions. So, they don't always agree with me, and they don't always kind of do the same things I do with regard to GMOs. But as an example, I think those conversations were still helpful.
Yeah, so we're almost out of time. So there are many more claims that we could have talked about when it comes to RFK. He says the vaccines cause autism. He talks about banning fluoride in water. He has like a big problem with like processed stuff, which as I've said to Megan earlier, in my kitchen I have whey protein, which is like the most processed stuff you can ever find, and it's pretty incredible if I dare say so myself. But I think sort of talking about specifically the vaccines and the way he views it, I think really encapsulates his method of thinking, or almost method of unthinking, is that almost everything, he's not actually looking for truth. He has I don't want to say agenda, but he sort of has something he is already made up his mind about, and is pretty much not willing, not actually looking for anything else. So just quickly, we have a few more super chats. So we have a super chat from Jonathan. Thank you so much. He says, Dr. Ribbons is a tremendous resource and guest. I do agree. Thank you, Jonathan, for your super chat again. Thank you, Philosophy at Work. He says, great stuff. As an environmentalist, he might also say, I'm not anti-human. I just don't know any human whose benefits outweigh their side effects.
I don't think he actually means that. I think there are a couple of humans he likes.
We have a super chat from Robert. Thank you so much. He says, our trolls are criticizing Dr. Ribbons for her naivete, but what they're really seeing here is something they cannot identify nor appreciate, and which is desperately needed today, earnestness. I definitely agree. And also a super chat from Enric. Thank you so much. He says, excellent to have the intelligence and understanding that Dr. Ribbons provides. Yeah. So
and I don't mind trolls. I mean, even my own 8-year-old daughter sometimes trolls me. It's cool.
So this was definitely a sort of a different episode than we usually do, but I'm glad everybody has watched us today. It was great to have you on, Megan, and it would be great to have you on again. Anything you'd like to say as we wrap up, and also maybe where can people find you or follow you if they would like to?
To be honest, I think I'm gonna take a page out of Alex's book and say, for now, I'm kind of keeping a low profile. So, in terms of finding me, you can't. But thank you for watching, and yeah, I'd love to come back on again and talk shop, because I love talking shop. In the meantime, yeah, I just wish everyone the best, and you absolutely have my empathy.
And we're gonna go to the reality show in just about a minute or so. We'll be talking about, is Putin about to nuke Ukraine? So a big switch of topics. Just a brief answer, probably no. But watch us on the reality show in just about a minute to find out more. Again, thank you, Megan, for joining me today. Thank you, everybody, for watching, and bye-bye.
Cheers.